Anyone could find humor in Don Rickles. Movie stars, presidents, and even Frank Sinatra. But Johnny Carson was his most memorable stage mate. The Tonight Show was ablaze with their chemistry week after night. And to the outside world, it appeared to be a friendship based on trust and laughing. But all changed in 1992 when Carson left late at night. Rickles believed he was promised something, but it never materialized. And he would be plagued for years by the ensuing resentment. Few could have predicted the truth that Rickles eventually shared about Johnny Carson before he passed away. The ascension of Don Rickles to fame. Comedy has always been about timing, delivery, and surprising people with a chuckle. And Johnny Carson and Don Rickles were two of the greatest men in the world of television during its heyday. In their own unique ways, they both revolutionized comedy. They appeared to be best buddies on screen, taunting one another all the time and making America laugh every night. The reality of their connection, however, was much more nuanced. And Don Rickles at last talked about what it was like before he passed away. Born on May 8, 1926, Don Rickles was the man who could make everyone in the room laugh more than anybody else by insulting everyone from political figures to movie stars. In Queens, New York, to parents who were Jewish immigrants. Grew up in the Jackson Heights neighborhood, where Yiddish culture and language were a part of everyday affairs. According to Don, his Jewish heritage influenced his sense of humor and wit, as well as providing him with a keen edge that audiences would come to appreciate. World War II disrupted Rickles' life, as it did for many young men of his time. He joined the U.S. Navy at the age of 18 in 1944 and served on board the motor torpedo boat tender USS Cyrene. He was impacted by the Navy's discipline and brotherhood even though he did not witness direct combat. Additionally, it allowed him to reflect on his goals for life after he got back home. Rickles was already certain that he wanted to be an actor after the war ended. He went to New York to study at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, of the most prestigious acting schools in the nation. In the hopes of landing dramatic roles in television or movies, he put in a lot of effort. In actuality, however, acting was not an easy task. He was consistently turned away, and his frustration began to mount. In the early 1950s, Rickles made the decision to give something new a shot. He started performing stand-up comedy. Not because he wanted to be a comic, but rather because it allowed him to continue performing. To interact with an audience while performing. He initially attempted common jokes, but they lacked the effect he desired. Rickles struggled to find his hallmark act until one day he was interrupted by some hecklers. His swift, scathing retorts from him brought down the house rather than upsetting the crowd. It was adored by everyone. They actually laughed more at his comebacks than at his prepared speech. That's when Don Rickles realized he had a real talent. His brand of insult comedy was something he developed over time. His act wasn't about making jokes or telling lengthy stories. Tearing into whoever was present was the goal. It wasn't mean-spirited, though. Rickles' magic was that he had the ability to ridicule someone severely while yet giving them the impression that they were part of the joke. His entire career would be characterized by such balance. That fashion altered his life forever one night at Miami Beach. Frank Sinatra, the most influential performer in the nation, was seated in the crowd. When Rickles saw him, he didn't think twice. He said, "Make yourself at home, Frank," glancing directly at Sinatra. "Slap someone." It exploded in the room. Everyone was aware of Sinatra's harshness, but this young comedian dared to make fun of him. Sinatra adored it. In an instant, he told his pals in the entertainment industry about Rickles and became his staunchest ally. Las Vegas's doors were opened by that endorsement. As the main attraction, Rickles played to large audiences and gained the monikers Mr. Warmth and, paradoxically, the Merchant of Venom. His act's paradox was encapsulated in those titles. The delivery was venomous, yet the spirit was warm. In addition to laughing, people came to be roasted by Don Rickles. His television career took off from there. He was a regular guest on talk shows such as the Dean Martin Celebrity Roasts, where he would laugh at people from all walks of life, including politicians, entertainers, and even athletes. He wasn't merely a stand-up comedian, though. Rickles was extremely successful on TV and in movies. In the late 1970s, he starred in the sitcom CPO Sharky. Prior to that, he had a brief sitcom called The Don Rickles Show, which demonstrated his keen timing. Additionally, he starred in films like Run Deep and Run Silent with Burt Lancaster and Clark Gable, demonstrating his ability to handle serious acting when given the opportunity. And the accolades continued to come in his senior years. His life and work were honored in the documentary Mr. Warmth: The Don Rickles Project, which earned him an Emmy Award in 2007. It was an apt homage to a man who had shaped comedy for decades and impacted a great number of performers in his wake. But behind the jokes, TV appearances, and connections with Hollywood celebrities, Rickles had another side to his life that he hardly ever spoke in public. The hidden pain of Rickles. Laughing was the foundation of Don Rickles' career. Outside of the spotlight, however, he told a very different tale. Viewers witnessed the rapid comebacks, the broad smiles, and the boundless enthusiasm. They were sometimes blind to the fact that Rickles had a private life that was full of happiness and tragedy. He experienced both profound personal tragedy and moments of affection. Rickles' life took a drastic turn in 1965 when he wed Barbara Sklar. He frequently joked that she was the reason he had survived all those years in the entertainment industry. Barbara wasn't merely his spouse. He became anchored by her. Additionally, they had 2 kids together, Larry and Mindy. Although his own daughter claims that he wasn't always the most outspoken man at home, Don adored being a parent. Later, Mindy Rickles said her father was emotionally reserved yet incredibly loving. She clarified that although Don was able to make the world laugh, he was quiet about his innermost thoughts. Rickles had a secret side like that. Within his family, the same man who could boldly roast a superstar in front of 1,000 people frequently found it difficult to express his own vulnerabilities. Nevertheless, she made it apparent that he was the ideal husband and father in spite of this. He was a really loving father, she said. He didn't make fun of us. Larry Rickles, his son, chose to pursue a career in entertainment. Larry turned to writing and producing. As a member of the team behind the Don Rickles production, Mr. Warmth, he also received an Emmy Award in 2007. Don, who frequently stated that he was more proud of his family's achievements than his own, was proud of this event. Tragic events occurred only 3 years later, though. Larry passed away unexpectedly from pneumonia in 2011 at the age of 41. Laughter had been the foundation of Don Rickles' profession, but the anguish of losing a kid was indescribable. Though he didn't discuss it in depth in public, Rickles was completely distraught, and those who knew him saw a shift. There was a deeper depth beneath his humor, yet it was still there. For the remainder of his life, he carried the burden of Larry's passing. Although Rickles liked his friendships with numerous celebrities, he was not immune to friendship problems, thus it wasn't the sole burden. Rickles' tangled sentiments for Frank Sinatra, the man who had once catapulted him into celebrity, were the subject of rumors and whispers over the years. According to several stories, Rickles occasionally voiced his displeasure against the singer, although he never publicly acknowledged all of the rumors. The claims that Sinatra had a sinister part in Marilyn Monroe's tragic tale were the most startling aspect of these rumors. According to these reports, Rickles thought Sinatra had taken advantage of Monroe in the studio. Rickles' reputation in Hollywood circles was permanently damaged by these contentious statements, even though he never stated them aloud in front of cameras. He was Mr. Warmth in the eyes of everyone. The man who was able to offend everybody and still succeed. However, he had regrets, pain, and opinions in his own life that didn't necessarily align with how others perceived him. Despite these personal challenges, Rickles never showed signs of faltering in front of the crowd. He always entered the stage with assurance, ready to let loose his witty repartee. However, he would soon have a character who would shape a large portion of his career. Johnny Carson. His best friend and most complex ally turned out to be the king of late-night television. Behind the scenes, their friendship was characterized by more than simply laughs, despite their obvious chemistry on television. The Tonight Show era Don Rickles never imagined that his appearance on the stage of The Tonight Show, which starred Johnny Carson, in 1965 would turn out to be one of the most pivotal moments in his career. What started out as a guest appearance swiftly evolved into a regular role, not as a performer or presenter, but as the ultimate wildcard. With over 100 appearances under his belt, Rickles eventually emerged as one of Carson's most regular guests. Each one was memorable, unplanned, and unpredictable. Contrast was the foundation of Carson and Rickles' successful chemistry. Johnny Carson was cool, collected, and at the right moment. No one in television history was better at playing the straight man than him. On the other hand, Rickles was a mess. Brazen, loud, and unafraid to express what others were too polite to even consider. They made magic together. At home, viewers tuned in to watch what would happen when Don Rickles was let loose on his set, in addition to listening to Carson's monologues. One of the most iconic events occurred in 1976. When Carson went to get a cigarette from his cigarette box on the desk while hosting The Tonight Show, he discovered it was broken. Who is the offender? Don Rickles, the guest host who had made an appearance the previous evening. Carson did a rare thing for late-night TV without skipping a beat. During the performance, he moved across the hall from the set to the studio where Rickles was filming CPO Sharky, his sitcom, and jumped in on the live recording. The crowd erupted in cheers as Carson squared up to him in front of everyone. After attempting to appear innocent, Rickles made the entire situation into a joke, begging Carson and joking that he was only trying to support himself. But the moment, which perfectly encapsulated their chemistry, became legendary and a part of television history. Rickles took front stage once more in 1978, 2 years later. During Carson's anniversary special, that is. Over the course of the late-night celebration of Carson's reign, Rickles transformed the occasion into one of his signature roasts. He made fun of Carson's numerous marriages and affluence, saying that Johnny changed spouses more often than most people changed vehicles. Carson let Rickles to run wild while he sat there smoking his cigarette and grinning his trademark smile. It demonstrated Carson's confidence in him to take risks that few others could afford. When Rickles was on the show, he also flourished in physical humor. In one well-known sketch, Carson was shown laying on a massage table while performing a comedic routine. Suddenly, Rickles rushed in and broke the tension. The serene setup became a comedic flurry as he plunged himself into the bit, manhandling Carson. Carson tried to remain in character, but he couldn't help but giggle as the audience burst out laughing. For Rickles, the unexpected visits became part of his mystique. He didn't only answer queries while seated in the chair. Every visit became an occasion because of him. The pair's banter was usually warm yet incisive. Rickles would disparage Carson's immense wealth and accuse him of living like a king while posing as a common man. He made fun of Carson's succession of marriages while feigning to give him love advice and making fun of his shortcomings. As the cool, somewhat irritated straight man, Carson sat back and let the attacks bounce off him. Their rhythm was so organic that it frequently felt more like a dinner conversation between two old friends than a late-night interview. The Tonight Show had a different side, though, despite the laughing. Johnny Carson was renowned for his command of the program. Rickles was allowed to run free on air, but he kept a firm hold on who was allowed to occupy the guest chair. A single invitation, or the reluctance to extend one, could make or ruin Carson's career, as many comedians and entertainers were aware. Some were even afraid of his power. A number of well-publicized events demonstrated Carson's influence over guest reservations. He had personally trained Joan Rivers, who was formerly his frequent guest presenter, but she was permanently barred from The Tonight Show after starting her own late-night show without telling him beforehand. The prohibition persisted until after his passing, and he never spoke to her again. Another instance included impressionist Rich Little, who allegedly got banned from performing because Carson thought he was making fun of him too frequently. Even Rickles, who was able to make fun of Carson in public, was aware of the limits. He could freely mock Johnny's distance on camera, making fun of him for being stiff or too serious. However, Carson was regarded as a very different person off camera, aloof, chilly, and frequently disinterested in making friends with his visitors. Several famous people who attended the events said that Carson was kind but aloof once the cameras stopped rolling. After the recording was over, he tended to withdraw into his own world and seldom ever spoke with anyone backstage. Rickles and Carson had a special friendship because of this dynamic. Rickles had the potential to succeed Johnny Shell, at least on stage, in contrast to many of the other visitors. The audience adored it because they thought they were witnessing a side of Carson that was inaccessible to others. The laughter was sincere, and Carson's infrequent episodes of losing his equilibrium frequently only occurred when Rickles was around. One of late-night television's enduring characteristics is that chemistry. Although their on-screen camaraderie was adored by the public, Carson's smile belied a far more nuanced reality. He was not only the late-night monarch. Few people ever saw him because he was a man with personal troubles. The personal troubles of Carson. Johnny Carson was a man with tremendous demons hidden behind his cool grin and shrewd timing. As the king of late night who kept America smiling, he appeared invincible on television. His life was quite different when he wasn't in front of the cameras. An almost constant craving for control, personal tragedy, and shattered marriages abound in this one. The 4 marriages that Carson had were almost all characterized by discord. His first marriage to Jody Walcott ended in divorce. Jody later described emotional abuse and violent outbursts that were driven by alcohol. What viewers perceived as a lovely host, Jody frequently perceived as a man who may be terrifying and unpredictable. Carson's drinking and anger made for an unstable home life that was short-lived. Joanne Copeland, his second wife, wasn't much easier. Joanne was candid when discussing Carson's drinking patterns, claiming that he had blacked out and displayed what she described as extreme rage against women. She showed a side of Carson that few outsiders ever saw, a man whose fears frequently manifested themselves in ways that were harmful. Like the first marriage, the marriage finally broke down due to those personal issues. Despite his many accomplishments, Carson's personal life never seemed to be steady. Behind the scenes, he battled intimacy, rage, and trust, yet he continued to advance professionally. Alcohol was involved, and it frequently made the problems that were already simmering beneath the surface worse. There appeared to be a pattern to each marriage: charm, strife, and dissolution. As a father, Carson also had to deal with tragedy. His 39-year-old son Richard passed away in an automobile accident in 1991. Richard was a photojournalist who was traveling along the California coast when he was involved in the tragedy. Carson decided not to go to the funeral despite the terrible loss. He reasoned that a private family occasion would become a public spectacle due to the huge media attention his presence would generate. His struggle with the gap between his public persona and his personal sorrow was made clear by this choice. Even though Carson was the most visible man in America every night, he was a profoundly quiet and solitary individual at heart. After the cameras stopped running, he tended to withdraw into his own secluded world, avoided lengthy interactions with guests, and seldom went to Hollywood parties. When he was not in the spotlight, his co-workers frequently characterized him as introverted, even reclusive. His concern with control permeated almost every aspect of his life, and he enjoyed having power over his environment. To take off some of his bottled-up energy, Carson used unconventional outlets. One of his favorite pleasures became tennis, a game that required control, discipline, and concentration. In order to express his feelings, he frequently withdrew to practice playing the drums, which he adored. These pastimes provided him with structure and a means of controlling the aspects of himself that were seemingly uncontrollable in interpersonal interactions. Carson's life was both fascinating and challenging to comprehend because of his paradoxes. On TV, a single gesture could make millions laugh, but in real life, his rage and disengagement caused his marriages to fail. The public loved him, but he was a recluse in private, frequently avoiding even his closest friends and family. All of this made his bond with Don Rickles more complex. Rickles made fun of Carson's marriages, affluence, and distant demeanor on TV. Although it was humorous to the audience, there was some reality hidden beneath the gags. Their banter was electrifying in part because of it, but it also sowed the seeds of tension that would eventually result in their own private consequences. Rickles and Carson's breakup. Although their on-screen chemistry delighted viewers, Don Rickles and Johnny Carson's friendship was not immune to animosity. Rickles felt that he was a logical choice to succeed Carson when he left from The Tonight Show in 1992 because of his extensive tenure with the show and his indisputable rapport with viewers. Though it may have seemed out of the ordinary to many, Rickles felt deserving of his place in the late-night throne. It never came to pass. NBC gave the show to a younger comic with a radically different approach, Jay Leno. In order to maintain high ratings, executives thought Leno's safe and approachable demeanor would appeal to middle America, which helped him establish his reputation as a stand-up comedian. Comedy wasn't the only consideration behind the scenes. Business, demographics, and corporate strategy were the topics of discussion. It was personal to Rickles, though. He apparently harbored a great deal of bitterness at the past over. In private, Rickles was critical of Carson throughout those years, according to friends and co-workers. Accuse him of treachery. He allegedly accused Carson of lying to him to make him think he had a chance at the position. Rickles believed that the man who had performed with him for decades, who had taken offense at his taunts and repeatedly dragged him back to the couch, had deserted him just when the greatest chance was at his fingertips. There was more than disappointment in Rickles' heart. He thought their friendship had been more about show than substance, based more on TV appearances than true devotion. Although it was well known in Hollywood that Carson was aloof off camera, Rickles had always thought their relationship was unique. The wound of learning otherwise, or at least of thinking so, never completely healed. While Carson relished his retirement, Rickles continued to harbor resentment. Even though Carson was still singing, making appearances on talk shows, and enjoying popularity long into his senior years, the topic of his retirement caused obvious annoyance. He reflected on his decades in entertainment, and according to insider reports, the animosity boiled softly but consistently. For audiences who recalled their glory days, Rickles kept the old rhythm alive by publicly making jokes about Carson. However, Barb's playfulness concealed her true rage. His on-screen relationship was frequently implied to be a contrived act rather than a genuine buddy. Beyond the cameras, the love that seemed so real beneath the studio lights was not very visible. Over time, Rickles' sentiments towards Carson shifted from rivalry to disappointment. In the end, the man who had been such a constant in his career had made him feel excluded. Rickles continued to bear the consequences of Carson's health decline in the early 2000s. Their relationship, which was previously the main focus of television comedy, had broken down. And what was left was an uncomfortable mixture of gratitude for Carson's skill and bitterness at how things turned out. Because of that complex past, Rickles found the occasion of Carson's death in 2005 to be even more poignant. The death of the king of late night was lamented by the world, but for Rickles, it also marked the end of a chapter that was full of unresolved anguish and laughter. The end of a period. Few celebrities ever leave with the grace that Johnny Carson did on the last night of The Tonight Show in 1992, yet over the years, his visibility gradually diminished. Carson stayed in near complete seclusion throughout his last years, rarely appeared on television, and rarely granted interviews. The guy who had been America's nightly companion by the early 2000s was living a quiet life, resembling a specter of his former life in show business. Finally, that chapter came to a close on January 23. Died at the age of 79 from emphysema-related complications. The news came as a shock to the entertainment industry. Even after more than 10 years of retirement, Carson's influence continued to loom large over late-night television, influencing all of his successors. It wasn't just the death of one guy, it felt like the end of a cultural era. The Tonight Show honored its former monarch on January 24, the very next night. Jay Leno, who had inherited Carson's chair, broke away from his typical structure of lengthy monologues to honor the man who had constructed the home he now occupied. The show brought together folks who had worked alongside Carson, laughed with him, and performed on stage with him throughout those defining decades. There were Don Rickles, Bob Newhart, and Ed McMahon, Carson's longtime sidekick. They joined together to honor Carson's career as well as his influence on comedy in general. Rickles, who had harbored complex sentiments for Carson for years, came to the homage with unexpected affection. Speaking openly on ABC, he described Carson as the best straight man a comedian could ask for. Carson was a complicated genius, he continued, a description that encapsulated the man's dual character as an aloof figure in private life and a superb host on stage. There was no sugar-coated farewell. Rickles did not pretend that the conflicts had never been there or that their friendship had been perfect. Rather, he decided to respect Carson by acknowledging his complexity as well as his skills. It had weight because Rickles, who never shied away from honesty, demonstrated that he still admired Carson's accomplishments. The memorial episode served as a reminder of the profound impact that Carson's loss will have. Having been with him for 30 years, Ed McMahon talked with the respect of someone who has lost a partner as well as a boss. The legendary comedian Bob Newhart recalled the innumerable evenings when Carson's program was the beating heart of American society. Additionally, Rickles, in his own unique manner, reminded the audience that Carson's brilliance lay not only in his jokes but also in the room he made for others to shine. The occasion was bittersweet for Rickles. He had peppered Carson's marriages, wealth, and distant demeanor on broadcast for decades. Carson himself had appeared to enjoy it, and audiences had adored it. The feeling that their friendship never quite developed to the extent that many had thought, however, was always hidden behind those giggles. Carson's passing signified more than just the passing of a life. It's signaling the end of a period in entertainment history. No one could really replace him, even in retirement, after he had defined late-night television for 30 years. Every subsequent host, including Leno, Letterman, Conan, and others, stood in his shadow. Additionally, the loss was personal to Don Rickles. It served as a reminder of both his own mortality and the passing of the generation of comedians who dominated American society in the past. Do you believe that Don Rickles ought to have been given the chance to host The Tonight Show? Tell us by leaving a comment below. Please remember to click the next video on your screen if you liked this one. For further updates, please like this video and subscribe to our channel.